from Mesa Verde National Park. We are excited to learn about the similarities in architecture and landscape our park shares with the sites in Espluga, Spain. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about our park. People have been living in what is now Mesa Verde National Park for at least 10,000 years. Starting around 500 CE, people farmed and built thriving permanent communities on the mesas and in the cliffs of Mesa Verde. Those people are known as the ancestral Pueblo people and are the direct ancestors of pueblos and tribes that live in the Southwest U.S. today. The park protects the rich cultural heritage of 27 pueblos and tribes and offers nearly 500,000 visitors annually, a spectacular window into the past. Mesa Verde is located in southwest Colorado in the United States of America. The park was established in 1906 to protect early human history and the nearly 5,000 ancestral sites. In 1978, the park was designated a World Heritage Site, and the justification included both the significance of the cultural resources and Mesa Verde's connection to contemporary indigenous communities with ties to Mesa Verde as an ancestral homeland. Mesa Verde is somewhat misnamed as it is not a true mesa, but a cuesta. Cuestas are similar to mesas, but instead of being relatively level, they gently slope in one direction. Mesa Verde is tilted slightly to the south, which provided more sun for the ancestral people to grow crops including corn, beans, and squash, and it extended the growing season by about 2 weeks. The mesa is cut with canyons that run north to south. Elevations in the park range from about 6,000 feet in the canyon bottoms to 8,572 feet on top of the cuesta. It's on the mesa tops that most of the people lived and farmed until the late 1100s, when they started building villages and alcoves along the canyon walls. They continued to farm the rich soils above on the mesa top. In the late 1100s, the people living on the mesa top began to move into the canyon alcoves, building the cliff dwellings that have made the park well known worldwide. Many theories exist about why this movement of people occurred. Some suggest it was to get closer to the natural springs in the alcove as important water sources for their communities. The largest cliff dwellings in the park are Cliff Palace and Spruce Tree House. Each have over 100 rooms. Most of the other 600 plus cliff dwellings in the park are much smaller and consist of a handful of rooms for living, ceremonies, and storage. Around 1300, the ancestral Pueblo people migrated again, moving away from Mesa Verde to areas further south in present-day Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, and Texas. Indigenous cultures have origin stories and oral histories regarding movement of their ancestors away from Mesa Verde. They were never meant to stay at Mesa Verde forever, and this place was just one step in their long journey to their present-day homelands. Continuing droughts, conflict with outside groups, and decreasing food resources probably also contributed to their decision to move their families south. Many of our visitors come to the park with the idea of abandonment or the lost civilization of Mesa Verde. Not only does this write indigenous people out of their history and disconnect modern tribal communities from their ancestral homelands, but it is also a disservice to park visitors who miss out on learning about the cultures that came from Mesa Verde. Early archaeologists recognized connections between ancestral Pueblo people and present-day Pueblo communities, yet over the many years, many visitors to Mesa Verde still came away with a story about people who mysteriously vanished. Even if our current interpretive media doesn't specifically promote this idea, older information perpetuates this misunderstanding. And so, in interpretation, we have opportunities and challenges for how to tell more inclusive stories to elevate Indigenous voice in our interpretive media and include all people in learning about and understanding Mesa Verde's rich cultural and natural heritage. As we replace and update wayside signs and publications, we pay close attention to their content and incorporate Indigenous perspective using language that is more culturally appropriate and inclusive. Some of the most powerful and meaningful connections for visitors can happen when visitors have the opportunity to hear directly from tribal community members. For example, the Mesa Top Loop audio tour is a 43-minute podcast that you can listen to anywhere, but is meant to complement the experience of driving the 6-mile Mesa Top Loop within the park. It is narrated by TJ Atsey, who is a park ranger from Laguna Pueblo and a direct descendant of the ancestral Pueblo people. The park offers a variety of cultural demonstrations and dances, and within the last year, we hosted dancers like the Red Sky Drum Group, our closest tribal neighbor, traditional fetish carvers, and pottery and weaving demonstrators. Mesa Verde Voices podcast is a collaboration between the park, a local public radio station, and the Mesa Verde Association. Its purpose is to connect the experiences of ancestral Pueblo people from the Mesa Verde region with the people of today. It includes interviews with tribal community members with strong connections to the area. Over 5 seasons, we've explored everything from archaeoastronomy, trade, and cultural preservation ethics. The Indigenous Ranger Intern Program hosted 4 interns this year, funded by a National Park Foundation Inclusive Storytelling Grant. The park works with Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps to recruit and support the interns, who receive educational awards based on their service. One of the greatest highlights of this last summer was seeing these young men make meaningful connections with ancestral sites and the connections they made with visitors. 2 of our interns returned to college in August, and the other 2 will remain at the park to assist with fall education programs. We look forward to having them all back at the park next summer. Through technology, the Cliff Palace virtual tour aims to meet people where they are, including those who aren't able to access the park in person. It is a 3D rendering of the largest cliff dwelling in North America, Cliff Palace, and provides perspectives from 3 of the park's Indigenous Ranger interns and the park archaeologist. The National Park Service mission of preservation sometimes conflicts with Native American values that favor allowing sites to deteriorate naturally. Many Indigenous groups view these places as having a lifespan in the same way humans have a lifespan. Invasive or extensive preservation treatments can be seen as interfering with the natural course of the site's existence. At Mesa Verde, preservation management of this landscape strives to honor Indigenous concerns while at the same time keeping them safe and in good condition. The ancient sites are maintained by a small group of preservation specialists. Currently, the crew includes 3 stonemasons, an archaeologist, an architectural conservator, and 2 Indigenous interns. The majority of preservation work involves repointing joints with earthen mortars or amended mortars, in-kind replacement of deteriorated stones, improving water drainage, and repairing damage from erosion and foot traffic from visitors. Red and yellow soil for mortar is collected from within the park. Today, stone quarrying is not permitted on site, though it was done historically. Local sandstone for preservation work has to be collected from the ground surface and rock falls. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find stone that has the appropriate color, size, and quality to use in preservation work. Starting in 2021, Mesa Verde partnered with the University of Texas Center for Cultural Sustainability to analyze the condition of Cliff Palace and help develop appropriate preservation treatments. The 4-year project uses non-destructive methods to gather data. This includes ground-penetrating radar to find voids in the walls and repeat LiDAR scans to determine how the structures are moving. Since the creation of the park in 1906, Mesa Verde has experienced many devastating wildfires. Over 70% of the park has burned. Most have been started by lightning strikes. Post-fire impacts on the cultural landscape include loss of vegetation that holds in soil, rock spalling, and loss of original wood features and alcoves. More intense rain events cause erosion up to 20 centimeters of soil in some areas over the past 20 years, and exposure of architecture and subsurface cultural deposits. After 100 years of continual learning, the park's preservation methods and philosophies have changed. The focus has shifted to less invasive methods of analysis, such as LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar, as well as intensive archival work with previously collected data. The preservation crew follows these best practices. Number 1, before performing any stabilization treatment, staff documents the existing conditions on site. Number 2, preservation treatments replicate the surrounding original material in color, texture, and workmanship. Care is taken to ensure the work does not obscure original construction details. 3, the primary role of structural stabilization is to preserve original fabric and prevent further loss. Preservationists use reconstruction unless it's necessary for structural stabilization of surrounding original fabric. Number 4, preservation treatments are thoroughly documented with annotated photographs and written narratives. Because many treatments are visually indistinguishable from original fabric, it is critical to track what has been altered. And number 5, these treatments are monitored to determine if they are effective. The team is constantly learning and refining techniques based on observation of how treatments are performed. The management challenges that Mesa Verde National Park's leaders are facing for conservation and preservation of the ancestral sites include how to maintain the areas with changing climate, environments, and human values. Natural erosion of the alcoves where the cliff dwellings are built is an ongoing struggle. How do we stop nature from taking its natural course? The park frequently experiences rockfalls on trails, roads, and in the alcoves. These rockfalls damage roads, trail, and the ancestral cliff dwellings. While the park can repair trails and roads, it is frequent and costly. Repairing ancestral cliff dwellings dating from the 1100s is different. Repairing them requires consulting and considering the viewpoints of the park's 27 different traditionally associated tribes, the State Historic Preservation Office, archaeologists, as well as considering visitor and staff safety. Many have differing views and opinions that often contradict each other.
Due to the possibility of rockfall, Spruce Tree House is closed. Spruce Tree House, the best preserved cliff dwelling at Mesa Verde National Park, is the third largest site in the park with a total of 120 rooms, 2 towers, and 8 kivas. Spruce Tree House was primarily occupied from AD 1206 to 1280, part of an extended community which included other cliff dwellings and mesa top villages. Early explorers named it for the trees found in the canyon bottom below the alcove, Douglas fir, also known as Douglas spruce. Two years after the park's establishment in 1908, the site was excavated and stabilized by Jesse Walter Fuchs of the Smithsonian Institution. The stabilization efforts by Fuchs included blasting a trench in the rock above the dwelling in order to reroute the flow of ground surface water, which keeps it from cascading over the rim onto the dwelling below. This blasting, however, may have disrupted a natural occurring arch in the cliff face, causing it to settle an additional few inches. The arch is part of a 270-foot-long crack that parallels the rim above the site. The crack measures a mere few inches to 5 feet at its widest. The arch section is visible from both the canyon rim as well as from within the site itself. The crack was originally stabilized by Al Lancaster in the 1940s. His team cleaned, covered, and waterproofed the crack, although it appears that these waterproofing methods were ineffective. In the early 1960s, the possibility of the arch breaking free prompted additional work to be done. In order to prevent severe damage to the dwelling, as well as to prevent harm to visitors on the trail below, the 1940 cover was removed and 46 rock bolts were installed to anchor the arch to the cliff behind it. The crack was then filled with aggregate concrete and grouted. Rockfalls are not a new phenomenon for Spruce Tree House. Archived reports show that this alcove is one of the most active of those open to public use at Mesa Verde. Sandstone of varying degrees of hardness, alternating with layers of coal and shale, form the canyons and alcoves. Natural forces such as rain, snow, ice, and the growth of trees and shrubs also contribute to alcove formation and exert pressure on the arch. As these forces work, they gradually erode and undermine the harder layers of sandstone, which can fall in pieces weighing from a few pounds to several tons. In 2015, a rockfall prompted a geotechnical engineering assessment of the alcove. Preliminary results revealed the risk of continued rockfalls, especially along pathways into and within the site. Until a full geotechnical assessment is conducted and work is done to reduce this threat, Spruce Tree House will remain closed.
The area remains closed today. The park faced the tough questions of what to do. Work to stop the natural erosion process and construction errors of the past to save the cliff dwelling and the alcove, or let nature take its course. A number of the Pueblo descendant groups believe that it is best to let nature take its course on the cliff dwellings and allow them to return to the earth. It's a natural understanding that things deteriorate just as much as life and death of ourselves. Dan Simplicio, Zuni Pueblo, from the Mesa Verde Voices podcast, Season 1, Episode 1. The park also considered the mission of the National Park Service to preserve and protect the natural and cultural resources for current and future generations. These differing values and ideas create challenges and opportunities for how to manage the park's resources. Ultimately, in this case, the park decided to pursue engineering solutions to secure the rock arch in the alcove to prevent a catastrophic rockfall. The work is scheduled for this winter. Decisions still remain about how and when to reopen it. What will the visitor experience be? While this decision was made for Spruce Tree House, this is only one ancestral site of thousands in the park. Some of the other most visited sites are facing similar issues, while most cliff dwellings and Mesa Top ancestral sites are not being actively stabilized, but instead monitored and studied. Park managers also face the challenge of how to protect resources and provide visitor experience amid a rapidly changing climate. The park is warming at a rate of 6.4 degrees per century, as measured since 1970. The future prediction indicate it will be warmer in the future, with either a warmer and wetter environment or a hotter and drier environment. Either scenario creates challenges for preservation of the cultural heritage sites and managing the public and their expectations. The park may face increased wildland fire incidents appearance of more invasive species competing with native vegetation and resources, changing of phenology, meaning longer summers and early spring impacting natural and cultural resources. These are the same challenges that modern Puebloan and tribes are experiencing in the Southwest for their own farming, cultural site preservation, and economic growth. Currently, the region is experiencing a drought that is more severe than the droughts experienced when the ancestral Pueblo people lived at Mesa Verde. National park managers are encouraged to engage in adaptive planning in the face of climate change, which is having a variety of impacts already. An adaptive planning framework reflects a familiar planning process and specifically addresses the implication of climate change and allows for continuing adaptation throughout the process and planning for multiple scenarios. Through this strategic and adaptive planning process, and working to include Indigenous voices from the traditionally associated Pueblos and tribes, the National Park Service at Mesa Verde National Park seeks to balance preservation, providing visitor access, and integrating the values and perspective of tribes and Pueblos into managing decisions. National parks in the United States are exploring co-stewardship opportunities with Indigenous groups to recognize the benefits of joining together to care for places that are culturally important to many groups, including those whose ancestors were the first people on the landscape. We benefit from working together with others across the world who have similar places and cultural connections to preserve and share with visitors. The National Park Service at Mesa Verde would welcome collaboration with similar cultural sites elsewhere in the world to share expertise, ideas and strategies for preservation, interpretation, education, and other intangible benefits. Thank you for your interest in allowing us to introduce you to Mesa Verde National Park and our World Heritage Site. You can learn more about the park at www.nps.gov/MEVE.